I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, Danielle Allen. We're going to hear from her, and then there'll be time for some questions and answers, questions from the audience, which I know the League is not a shy group, so I'm sure there will be many, many questions. So we are really fortunate and lucky to have Professor Allen with us today. She teaches public policy, politics, and ethics at Harvard University. She directs the Edmund and Lily Safra Center for Ethics and is the James Bryant Conant University Professor, one of Harvard's highest honors. She is also the newly minted founder and president of Partners in Democracy. Danielle is a seasoned nonprofit leader, democracy advocate, national voice on pandemic response, distinguished author, and a mom. Her work to make the world better for young people has taken her from teaching college and leading a $60 million foundation, writing for the Washington Post, advocating for cannabis legalization, democracy reform, and civic education. And most recently, she made history as the first Black woman to run for governor of Massachusetts. In her role as board chair for Partners in Democracy, she continues to advocate for democracy reform to create greater voice and access in our democracy and drive progress toward a new social contract that serves and includes us all. And I'd like to thank the League members. We did what Partners in Democracy calls a deliberation process. So we had several groups that did a focus group for Partners in Democracy. So thank you for those who took part in that. That was super helpful. Danielle's many books include the widely acclaimed Our Declaration, a reading of the Declaration of Independence in Defense of Equality, Cuz, The Life and Times of Michael A., Democracy in the Time of Coronavirus, and Justice by Means of Democracy. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Allen.
Thank you so much, Patty. It's just really great to be here. I just want to make sure I've got my clock up so I can tell what time we're on. There we go. It's such a huge pleasure. So Patty, thank you for your leadership. I really enjoyed your overview of the great work you're all doing. Really exciting. And Elizabeth, Madam President, thank you for all you do. And the panel was terrific. It was really, I'm such a huge admirer. I've learned so much from Jean that I really was grateful for the chance to sit in and listen. And it was inspiring to hear the commitment and intentionality that League chapters are bringing to DEI work. So thank you for that. It means a lot. This is an incredibly important time in our democracy. I don't have to tell you that. I mean, yeah, what happened yesterday, right? President federally indicted, former president. I mean, it's an extraordinary moment. That was a hugely important moment. We're also very fragile at this moment, as we have to acknowledge and take seriously. So there's a huge amount of urgency around democracy work, and the League has been a model for more than a century, as you know. The League really comes from work in the early 20th century to renovate our democracy at another very perilous and difficult and dangerous time. So in the early 20th century, as you know, of course, we got the right of women to vote because of the work of activists who then formed the League. We got direct election of senators. We got actually some of the early changes to how parties operate to put hands in the power, put power in the hands of the people. So the sort of caucus system and the like came in the early 20th century to sort of get rid of the machine bosses, a sort of Tammany Hall story and all of that. So the point is just that the League of all organizations in this country has this incredible legacy and tradition for stepping up. And I believe we're in another moment, another 100-year moment where we need comprehensive democracy renovation. That's what I'm going to talk about today, but I'm going to just explain to you a little bit first how it is I've come to do this work on democracy renovation, what exactly I mean by that, and then why, again, I think the League has such an important role to play. So, you know, when folks ask me what I work on, whether as a professor or as an advocate, I always just say democracy, past, present, and future thereof, and no question mark at the end of that from my point of view. I come by that commitment and passion totally honestly. It's a matter of family inheritance. So my granddad on my dad's side helped found one of the first NAACP chapters in Northern Florida in the 40s. Exactly. So some of you know, like, Northern Florida is the same thing as Southern Georgia, okay? It is the same. Lynchings were on the rise. He was taking his life into his hands, incredibly dangerous work. On the other side of my family, my great-grandparents were among those activists in the early 20th century who fought for women's right to vote. My great-grandmother ended up in the hospital one day when there was supposed to be a march because she was having my grandmother, but her husband went to the march for women's rights to vote for her. So it is always all people who have been part of the League and moving the League's work forward. And then that great-grandmother ended up as Elizabeth president of the League of Women Voters in Michigan in the 1930s. So, and we're all historians in my family, so I still have her sort of rules of order, her cheat sheet, her pocket size rules of order she carried around, although in her case, this was a little booklet written by, you may know this name, Mrs. Emma Fox. She was very famous for helping leagues set up their operations in the early 20th century, and was called Don'ts for Presiding Officers. Long list of things presiding officers should not do. So I grew up from people, among people who have loved and fought for democracy for generations. And they were people who often heard X is impossible. Social equality for African Americans in the South is impossible. Women getting the right to vote is impossible. Their answer was, not only is it possible, it's necessary. And so the only question is how. So I call us how people. We're how people. We're going to figure out how to do the thing that's necessary to do. So I grew up in a big network, big family of civically engaged people, and they were engaged all across the political spectrum. There was this one crazy year in my youth, 1992, when my aunt was on the ballot in the Bay Area in California for Congress for the Peace and Freedom Party, on the left-hand side of the spectrum. And the very same year, my dad was running for Senate from Southern California as a Reagan Republican. So our family dinner table conversations were intense. They went at it and they were so different. I mean, they loved each other. They had a tight bond, but they were so different. My dad was like really super skinny, professorial, always smoking a pipe with like pipe smoke curling around his head. My aunt was like a big woman. She built like a Mack truck. She had a huge belly laugh. She was gay, you know, got married really early before even marriage was really officially allowable. But then when San Francisco opened up, you know, was one of the first people to get married to her partner. And they just went at it hammer and tongs. And I was a young person, like just watching back and forth, trying to figure it out, like how to make sense of this argument. It became clear to me that for all their disagreements, there was this thing they shared. They shared a deep commitment to empowerment for themselves, their families, their communities. Huge arguments about how. My dad arguing for market liberties and civic virtues, and my aunt, arguing for public sector investment across all segments of society, arguing for experiments in living, but they were both focused on that project of empowerment. And in addition, the other thing that was very clear to me watching them was that for all that they disagreed on the how, they never broke the bonds of love. They were there for each other. They always also communicated that they would have each other's back come what may. And they held that person in front of them sacred, brought a sense of the sort of dignity, basic dignity of the person in front of them to all those conversations. So that's where I got my education in democracy. This project of self-government, a project of empowerment, being in a position where you can help steer the direction of your community. It's not going to be done to you, you're going to do it with. We're all going to do with together to steer the direction of our community. And we're going to do that even with people that we disagree with. The League is really famous for making a big coalition, right? Trying to achieve a supermajority for democracy, I like to call it. Yes, there are some crazies, and we draw a bright line in relationship to the crazies, but we can work to build a supermajority for democracy that really does span across different ideological positions. Got to draw that bright line, got to show where that line is, but what is that supermajority for democracy? Now, coming up in that world, I mean, I really did in many ways take democracy for granted, took its value for granted. And it wasn't really until I was watching my own generation come up in the world that the question of democracy became much more personal and much more pointed. So my parents' generation, everybody pretty much moved up. So my granddad was a fisherman, then kids were small business owners and professors. On the other side, from factory workers to accountants and the like. But for my generation, it's been what I call the great pulling apart. So here I stand in front of you, have the incredible privilege of speaking to you on this lovely Saturday afternoon in this beautiful city of Worcester, which I so enjoy. A tenured professor at Harvard. I personally believe there's no more privileged role on the planet, like forget Jeff Bezos, from the point of view, freedom and security, chance to control your own time. I mean, it just is a true blessing. And I feel my good fortune and my privilege every day. I've got a brother who's a corporate executive. But at the same time, I have cousins who are not with us, my age mates, the people I grew up with. And they're not with us because of substance use disorder, because of homicide, the worst things, the kinds of things you really cannot feel at peace about. I lost my youngest cousin, Michael, in 2009, and that was a real life turning point moment for me, where I said to myself, well, look, this democracy thing we do, this sort of project of empowerment, and the purpose of that is it's really supposed to help every generational cohort move up together, not live through this incredible pulling apart. And what happened in my family is what's happened in the country. The 50 plus years of my lifetime have perfectly coincided with the growth of income inequality, the growth of wealth inequality, the rise of mass incarceration, the rise of polarization. So I lost my cousin Michael, and I asked myself, what can we do? What can we do to change the dynamics and get back to a place where this democracy is doing what democracy is supposed to do, giving people the chance for empowerment, where individuals, families, and communities can use that empowerment to take themselves all forward together. Now, I will tell you, the first thing I tried to do was work on justice reform. And you heard the sort of reference to work on cannabis legalization. And I was glad to do that work, but a lesson became very clear very quickly. And that was, even where we had bipartisan solutions, it was incredibly hard to get them through. The governance dysfunction was so profound, especially at the federal level. And this is still true, even if you take the example of cannabis legalization. We have legalization here in Massachusetts. We have it in other states. We haven't achieved at the federal level, even though the majority of Americans recognize that this would be a reasonable way out of many of the problems related to the war on drugs. And you can go down the line. Gun violence, for example, reproductive freedom. The American people is in a different place from where our Congress acts. Now, that is a gap. That is not okay in a democracy. Congress is supposed to be our voice. It's the first branch. It's the voice of the people. So starting in about 2013, when Congress had an approval rating of 9%, even worse than now, in other words, I decided the thing to focus on was democracy renovation. When I use that phrase, what I mean by that is not exactly democracy reform, because that just makes it sound like you had a thing that was kind of working and then you just like got out of whack. You got to kind of reform it back again, or else it kind of makes it sound like the problem you're really focused on is corruption. Democracy renovation is a little bit different. The idea is the democracy we live in that should empower all of us. It's sort of like a house that we've built together, and that actually, honestly, we've all built, even if some built it not always freely. Okay, but it's a house we have all built together. Now, that house isn't fit for purpose in the 21st century for a lot of reasons. There's the basic ones, like any house. Our family's bigger. Our family is really super diverse in a way that is different from in previous generations. Young people below 18, majority minority at this point in the country, right? Our society is just much bigger. Millions, hundreds of millions of people. We're a big place. We've scaled up. There's a lot of complexity, and technology has dramatically transformed the shape of our existence. And at the same time that there are those sort of routine problems, there's the other basic issue that our house was never built for everybody in the first place. Some got rooms with a view, light-filled and beautiful. Others relegated to dark, dangerous, tiny basement spaces. We have been renovating consistently and continuously over the course of the country, but we're not done. We still need to renovate to solve that problem that we weren't originally built for everybody. So democracy renovation is that work of literally taking this house we live in together and figuring out where do we have to make the adjustments so that this can be fit for purpose in the 21st century, bring real empowerment to everybody, give us the chance to steer our own lives individually and work with our communities to steer our lives together. That's the project. Now, let's get more specific and let's talk about Massachusetts and what this work means a little bit more concretely. So Patty mentioned my organization, Partners in Democracy. We're really focused on the idea that you've got to think about democracy renovation holistically. All right. And again, just think about your house renovation. If you really are going to work on your house renovation, you might decide, okay, we're just going to do the kitchen this time. That's a thing people decide, or we're just going to add a porch. But even if you're making that decision, you're still thinking about how your whole house functions and all the different pieces and parts and what makes it good to live in or not. And in the case of democracy, what it means to think holistically about your house is to think about three things. Okay. There's the right to vote. It's a cornerstone. And Jean made some really important points earlier today about voter registration in Massachusetts. I'll come back to that. The right to vote's a cornerstone. But the thing is, the right to vote doesn't get you anything if you don't have competitive elections. So you've got to have a right to run, and you've got to have competitive elections too. Meaningful choice, diversity of candidates, all different elections. And in addition to the voting statistics Jean shared, we are at the bottom in the country with regard to the number of competitive elections we have. So our state legislature faces the fewest contested elections of any but one other legislature in the country. But even having competitive elections doesn't get you anything if you can't see what your elected officials are doing once they're in office. So we say there's the right to vote, there's the right to run, but there's also the right to see and shape your community. And here's a thing on that one that I don't think we've all taken in quite enough. The advent of social media has really knocked some of the pillars out from under our democracy. So it's done many things, and it has given us a chance to coordinate and find communities of affinity, Facebook groups where people share our interests and things like that. But it's also killed off local news. And local news was public notice for meetings. Local news was a place where you could raise your voice and publish an op-ed on something. Local news was where and how communities could see what was happening, could see what the state legislature was doing, could track that, could know when it was time to step up and lean in and try to get something done. So we have to deal with the real transformation of the civic infrastructure that makes it possible or not so possible to see and shape our communities. Those news issues are one of them. So too, campaign finance issues are also really huge. If you can't really see where the money is going, where it's flowing, how it's impacting people or influencing people, you can't see and shape your community. So that's what we do. We spend time trying to think in Massachusetts holistically about that right to vote, that right to run, that right to see and shape our community. And so we were really 100% behind the League's work with the Election Modernization Coalition. The work that you're doing there is really important. Same-day voter registration. Again, we were hearing the statistics of the difference it makes for communities of color in the chance to participate in the Commonwealth. We're also exploring the measure to change our election system at the state and federal level away from using party primaries to following the sort of municipal model where you have all-comers preliminaries instead of party primaries. Think Boston, think Springfield, for example. You then take a certain number of finalists forward to the November final round. Boston takes 2 finalists forward, for example. But at the state level, we have some new models. Alaska now takes 4 finalists forward in the final round. Nevada has just voted in taking 5 finalists forward. And when you take that number of finalists forward, then in that final round, you also use an instant runoff. Okay, so the idea is like you've got 5 finalists, whoever comes in 5th, they get, and if nobody's over a 50% threshold, that 5th place person gets knocked out. Their voters' votes get reallocated to their second choices. And you do that until somebody gets over the 50% threshold. Right, so the idea then is nobody can take office without having built a majority coalition, right? Not sort of just getting through on a little piece of the electorate where actually most people have voted against you. Now, the other element of that kind of reform would bring competitive elections The other thing it would do is make sure that candidates were always having to campaign to the whole electorate all the time, okay? Working to pull people back into the process. And it would mean that it wouldn't do them any good to be negative about their immediate opponents, because they need to build coalitions where they're going to be somebody's second choice vote as well as their first choice vote. And those things should really change the dynamic of elections and help make them healthier. So then lastly, on the right to see and shape, we're doing things like, for example, working with others to build some new tools for people to use. And I was talking about this tool earlier. There's a new tool that's just been released called MAPLE, the Massachusetts Platform for Legislative Engagement. And this is a tool that can be used to post testimony. It's a tool that can be used to see where bills are in the committee process. In other words, to see and shape what our state legislature is doing. It's rebuilding that civic infrastructure that's been knocked out from under us by the disappearance of local news. So at Partners in Democracy, we're working again on this sort of 360-degree holistic standard for thinking about healthy democracy. Here in Massachusetts, we really do have work to do. We are below average for all communities of color in the Commonwealth with regard to voting registration and participation. We're below average. We're Massachusetts. We're supposed to be the best. We're not the best. I know we're all working so hard. There's so much good work that everybody's doing. We should be the best. We can be the best. We can set an example for the country, but we really have to look squarely at the fact that we're not there yet. And I really do think getting there does require putting all these pieces together. You all know when you do voting registration work, people will say to you, what's the point? We vote, there's no point. Nothing flows from that. Well, why? Again, because voting alone is not enough. You got to vote in competitive elections, and then you've got to be able to follow up those competitive elections with being able to see and shape what your elected officials are doing. That's what real accountability and democracy is like. That's what responsive representation is like. So I think getting there is all the hard work that you're already at. So in that regard, I want to just, hats off to the League of Women Voters. Hats off to your efforts to grow your membership, because we do need more people coming in. Hats off to your efforts to diversify who's participating in your work. This is a season for democracy renovation. And one of my goals, one of my personal goals, my sort of 20-year goals, is that historians will look back at the years from 2017 to 2037 and say, that was a time of democracy renovation in America. That was a time when big things changed. And my other hope is that when they look back and say, that was an age of democracy renovation, they will say, and the League did it. Okay? And they will say, and Massachusetts led it. Massachusetts did it, because Massachusetts did it before. We did it in the beginning. We did it for abolition. We did it for women's rights to vote. We can do it for ourselves and deliver the democracy that we deserve, both in this state and for the whole country. Thank you. I think we were promising 15 minutes of questions to keep you on schedule. Is that right? Yep.
So people should feel free on Zoom and in the room to raise your hand.
Yes. Danielle, the holistic picture is there.
Hold on one second.
What do you say to the person who says, well, I'm not going to register and vote until you fix all that other stuff? Can you do a conversation around that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'm going to answer the question with a comparison to another space I work in. So I do a lot of work in civic education as well. And I love that goal in the League's goals too, the toolkits for middle school and so forth. And there's a similar question that comes in that context. Young people will say, well, why are you asking us to care about this democracy when it's so obviously broken? Fair question, like they're not wrong. And so my answer back is always, I'm working on both things. But if I am working on the renovation piece, I actually need you to help do that. So I can promise you that if you register to vote, I will also connect you to the work that is helping to drive the renovation. That's how I answer that question. Yeah, in the back.
I don't need a microphone. No, you do for those. You need it for those on Zoom.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So you actually mentioned candidates, and I will tell you, one of the reasons I have problems with that is I've always really liked my representatives. I'm very lucky. But the other thing that comes up a lot when I've done both inside and outside is ballot initiatives. So where do ballot initiatives come from? In Massachusetts, we have a right to direct petition to the legislature, which most states don't, no other state actually has, but we also have ballot initiatives. And sometimes I have found, especially in community colors, because I live in Boston and I live in one of those communities, that those spark much more interest. So I just, would you like to
Yes.
comment?
Absolutely. No, I mean, so first of all, let me say, I mean, we are fortunate to have a really impressive array of great legislators. So to say that we need more competitive elections is not actually to say anything about the people that we have. I'm a huge fan of our statewide officers. I put Governor Healy's name in nomination at the convention in June. I'm a supporter down the line. At the same time, I also know that no democracy can stay healthy over the long term if you don't have competitive elections. And I also know that even the legislators we love will be better legislators if we give them what they deserve, which is a real chance to hear from the people. And the way you get your best chance to hear from the people is in competitive elections. So I believe our legislators actually need it so that they can do their job as well. For me, that's a really important part of it. But it is, absolutely the question, or the fact that we do have a lot of talented, diligent people in the state house. But again, if you care about preserving that over time, I think competitive elections are really important for that. So, and yes to ballot initiatives. So we are actually exploring a ballot initiative at my organization for same-day voter registration, the top 5 election method that I just described, and a provision to ban foreign money from our elections. And what that means specifically is not individuals, but corporations that have above a certain percentage ownership share from outside the US. So think Uber, for instance, which is majority owned by the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. So, but at the moment, Uber can contribute in our elections, or in our ballot initiative. So
In the room, but I just want to remind our folks on Zoom that if you have a question, please raise your hand and Julie or Bryn will let us know, and then we can ask it to Danielle. So go ahead in the room. Go ahead.
Very excited to hear your presentation, but I have this anger in me about, let's speak to just Massachusetts, how we are getting more and more centralized power at the top. The Senate president now has removed term limits. The power is so centralized in our state legislature, sure, that our individual legislators have very little power. And they've also eliminated whatever transparency tools we had, it seems. So I'm looking for some how-tos to address this consolidation of power in our own state house.
well, thank you for sharing. And I also just appreciate your naming the emotions that you're bringing into democracy work. I mean, I think a lot of people are feeling a lot of anger across the board, right? In a lot of different dimensions. So you have a set of reasons here in Massachusetts. I think a lot of people are really angry about things that are happening at the national level as well. And so it's just important to say that out loud, because at the end of the day, that anger fuels us, but we also have to figure out how to take that anger and then bring it into all the work, right? Turn it into sort of the energy of work. With regard to your specific question, I take your question to be really at the end of the day about accountability. And I would use that word again, and healthy democratic accountability. For me, it does come back to the question of whether or not you have a system that supports competitive elections. Here in Massachusetts, at this point in time, we have a majority of voters, 61%, who are not enrolled in a party, okay? This is really important, because what that means is even though you can choose a ballot at the primary moment, it does actually mean that our current system of elections is in many ways not open to the full electorate. And so you don't have the full kind of dynamism of accountability that you would have if we could bring the whole electorate into the process. So that for me is one of the big reasons for moving away from the party primary system and having that all-comers preliminary, because then you get more voices in, you get more participation, you get a broader range of perspectives. And I think you start to get the kind of actual dynamism of accountability operating.
On Zoom, I'm just gonna have Julie read it out.
We have one question from the Zoom audience. What is the effect of the competitive elections you described, including the ranked choice voting, on the majority minority control of the state level and federal level legislatures?
So at the state and federal level, yes.
Correct.
Okay. Now I'm going to sit down for this one. That was a big question. No, that's good. It's a good question. So, thank you for that question, because it is really important to ask, how does work at the state level connect to the federal level? I can imagine many of you are sitting here feeling sort of slightly frustrated listening to me, in the sense that we have problems in Massachusetts, as was just called out, but we also, have things that are a lot better than a lot of other parts of the country, right? And so we can sometimes think, well, why should we put this work into Massachusetts when you look at things that are happening in Texas, for example, or look at what's happening in Ohio, where they're trying to get rid of or make sort of a supermajority requirement for ballot initiatives and so forth. So the reason it's important is because there is a connection between the state and federal level, and it is linked through this party primary question. So I'm just trying to try to get the most efficient way of explaining. So there are various things that would be really good to see changed at the federal level. For example, I'm a big advocate for increasing the size of the House of Representatives. It hasn't been increased in 100 years. It would bring representatives back closer to their constituents. It would make it cheaper to run for office in smaller districts. There's a lot of reasons it's a good thing. But you ask the question, like, how are you going to get that done? Like, how many members of Congress does it take to increase the size of the House? And I'll say, well, it would take 585 for that vote. And then you'll say, but we only have 435, Danielle. Like, yeah, that's right. We're not going to be able to get this done for a long time, right? We sort of feel stuck with where we are. How can we get this Congress to bring in changes that we need? The answer to how we can get this Congress to bring in changes that we need is that we need different election rules at the state level. Because currently, members of Congress are elected by a very tiny sliver of the electorate. So for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene is elected by 8% of her electorate in her district. The reason for that is because party primary system. So the activist base has captured the operations of the party. And then because of gerrymandering as well, that's sort of all you have to do to then in fact control Congress sort of all the way through. So a very small number of people can actually control the whole mechanisms. If you look at the Biden debt ceiling deal that was just passed and compare Republicans who are in states that don't have party primaries anymore, which is Louisiana, California, Washington, Alaska, Nevada, compare Republicans in those states to Republicans in states with party primaries. The Republicans without party primaries, about 90% of them voted for the deal. The other states, about 60% voted for the deal. So the point is, I'm sorry this is getting tangled, it's kind of long-winded. We got to free the politicians. That's actually the point. We've got to free the politicians from the primary process. That's what the preliminary gives us. It gives us the chance for people to be a little more independent-minded, make some better choices, especially on the Republican side, not be captured by that party base that is really steering things in a problematic direction. And so how do we get that nationally? We don't need the whole country to have this new kind of voting method, but we do need a sort of critical mass of states. So we have to move beyond Louisiana, California, Washington, Alaska, and Nevada. And it would be great if Massachusetts could be a leader in bringing in the next 5 batch of states. If we could get to 10 states that are electing their federal delegation in this fashion, we would have that dynamism in Congress that would permit better decision-making that doesn't just fall into the sort of extreme camps. Does that make sense as an answer? Okay.
One more question. Who wants to wrap it up? Okay, go ahead, Mary.
All right, thank you. So Danielle, your 5 top candidates get rid of the primaries. Massachusetts referendum question on ranked choice voting. Do you want to do a post-game analysis? What happened?
Sure.
That was a hard loss here.
Yeah.
And especially thinking about the 61% independent, right?
Yep. No, absolutely. I appreciate that. So so first of all, say just for full clarity on the top 5 piece, it's a hybrid system. It's not a pure ranked choice system. So the first round vote is plurality. Top vote getters move on. And then the second November round is an instant runoff ranked choice voting method. So it's plurality. So in that regard, it would be a different kind of effort than the ranked choice voting effort, which was like RCV everywhere for everything. There's obvious things to say about the politics of it. You know, Governor Baker's decision just a week before the election really did swing opinion. It was so he put a thumbs down on it like a week before the election. It was polling very close right before the election, and then that really brought it down. That said, I will be honest, I think there is a deeper problem. We don't actually have very many elections where we have enough candidates to rank anything. All right. So we didn't really need it. Now, why is this the case? There are several reasons. Among them, people are often not aware, we have literally the 50th, the most restrictive statewide candidate ballot access requirements in the country. We have the most restrictive statewide candidate ballot access requirements in the country. What does that mean? So for statewide offices and so Senate and the constitutional officers, to put your name on the ballot requires 2 things. It's called technically both and method. Signatures, 10,000 for the governor. That's different for other levels. And also winning 15% of the delegates at your party convention. Most states have gotten rid of that both and method. Most states you can get on the ballot just with signatures. Our signature level is also higher than other states. So there's only one other state left that uses both and. It's Colorado. They have a 10% threshold for the convention part instead of 15. They also let candidates get those delegates on multiple rounds of voting at the convention. We insist on first round, which basically makes it, yes, it's an extremely restrictive structure here in Massachusetts. So at any rate, there are other pieces of our system that contribute to that as well, but there's a reason we don't have that many candidates, because that sort of trickles down, because then you can't have, there's no point running for statewide office for most people, is the truth. Therefore, fewer state legislators actually go for statewide office than you would see in other states. So fewer of their seats open up. So you have fewer contested elections for that reason. So your great legislator whom you love, they should get to go for statewide office, but they won't. Okay? So it runs all the way down the system. So I think that's my post-game analysis of why it failed, is we don't have enough candidates to rank for the most part. Thank you for your time.